So our third North Carolina speaker, and I think what this tells you is that this is a major issue in our state, is Emily Donovan from Clean Cape Fear. Emily's the co-founder of Clean Cape Fear and is a tireless advocate for clean water, spending her free time educating the public on the dangers of PFAS and other toxins in our drinking water and environment. She has testified before Congress twice regarding DuPont Chemours poisoning the drinking water supply for 250,000 residents downstream of the Fayetteville, North Carolina facility, including giving testimony during the first ever congressional hearing on PFAS contamination. She participated in a Washington Post live panel discussion with actor Mark Ruffalo and lawyer Rob Bilott. Most recently, she worked to secure reverse osmosis filling stations within 49 public schools impacted by PFAS contamination in Brunswick and New Hanover counties. She regularly travels the country sharing her personal impact story as well as those of her friends and neighbors. She frequents Washington, D.C. and Raleigh, North Carolina, pressuring lawmakers and regulators for swifter responses to the growing PFAS public health crisis. Emily lives in Brunswick County with her husband David and her boy-girl twins. I think that means one of each. She's been a resident of Brunswick County since 2009. Emily, your turn.
First of all, thank you everybody for this incredible opportunity. Mike Waters touched upon the air emission concerns impacting private well owners living in 2 counties that surround the chemical facility. I will focus on the 300,000 municipal ratepayers living in 3 counties downstream of DuPont Chemours who rely on the Cape Fear River as their primary source of drinking water, as well as concerns of residents living along the Haw River in Pittsboro, North Carolina. We were overexposed to a mixture of PFAS for 40 years. The 2019 consent order required Chemours to disclose the total amount of PFAS released into the drinking water supply. That report documented nearly 300 newly identified PFAS detected in their waste streams. It's reasonable to assume our region was chronically overexposed to more than 300 different PFAS on a daily basis for decades. Research from Dr. Canape's lab at NC State showed how our local water utilities were unable to filter out these PFAS, meaning what was detected in the river was detected at nearly equal levels in our finished tap water. While Chemours is no longer actively releasing their waste stream into the Cape Fear River, the legacy groundwater contamination from under the facility continues to seep into our drinking water supply. It is the source of contamination which continues to put Wilmington and Brunswick County in the news for still having some of the highest levels of PFAS in tap water in the nation. Our friends in Pittsboro, North Carolina are equally suffering from high levels of PFAS in their tap water. A recent Consumer Reports study found Pittsboro had the highest levels of PFAS recorded in their nationwide tap water study. Brunswick County ranked in number 6. The source of Pittsboro's PFAS is likely industrial waste flushed into municipal sewer systems and released into the Haw River, which is their primary source of drinking water. Current PFAS clinical guidance does not adequately address the amount or types of exposures we are experiencing in North Carolina. Our concerns are not isolated to drinking water. Researchers are finding levels of PFAS in river sediment, local seabirds, as well as contamination in regional alligators and fish. UNCW detected GenX and rainwater samples on their campus located 80 miles from the Fayetteville location. Local shellfish have not been studied in our region, but we know from other research shellfish can become contaminated with PFAS. Because our drinking water was so severely contaminated, we simply cannot afford one more drop of PFAS from any other pathways. We know there are background levels of PFAS contamination in fast food packaging, indoor dust, textiles, and many consumer products. We need clinical guidance to inform and protect overexposed communities from more than just the drinking water. The hardest part right now is knowing that we still cannot request a blood test from our doctors to check for the most current PFAS we know we were exposed to. I want to know how much PFAS is in my child's blood, and there isn't a commercially available test that can screen for North Carolina's variety of PFAS. The commercial tests that do exist are costly and often have detection limits set too high. This needs to be addressed. And let me be clear, Wilmington and Fayetteville are not isolated incidences. We are ground zero for one chemical company's massive supply chain. I have heard scientists dismiss our contamination as too unique, and I believe this is a false narrative. DuPont Chemours makes all their PFAS in North Carolina, but then sells their chemistry to a ton of manufacturers across the nation who are also releasing this PFAS as a waste. Merrimack, New Hampshire is a well-documented example. Dr. Hoppen's GenX exposure study was established a few months after we publicly learned of our contamination crisis in 2017. It found Wilmington participants had 10 different PFAS in their blood. 4 of those PFAS were unique to DuPont Chemours. Participants had 4 times more PFOA and 2 times more PFOS in their blood than the national average. We are grateful for the fast action of Dr. Hoppen and her team to establish the GenX exposure study so quickly. This data is invaluable. It also highlights the clear need for a massive epidemiological review in our region. We are a population of 300,000 PFAS contaminated residents, and so far only 400 residents have been studied. If the CDC, ATSDR, and NIHS really wanted to research cancer and autoimmune links to PFAS exposures, they need look no further than the 300,000 of us sitting here in southeastern North Carolina, chronically overexposed to a ton of PFAS for 40 years. We are your statistical power. Sadly, at this point, it feels like guinea pigs are treated better because at least their exposures are thoroughly studied for the betterment of humanity. Pittsboro also participated in a PFAS exposure study led by Heather Stapleton at Duke University. Pittsboro's serum samples had 6 types of PFAS in their blood. There was more PFOS, more PFOA, and more PFN in their blood than Wilmington residents. They had 7 times more PFDA than the national average. Clearly, North Carolinians are not being exposed to 1 or 2 PFAS. We are exposed to a mixture of legacy and newly identified PFAS. We know PFOA at 2.5 nanograms per milliliter is linked to increased cholesterol, at 4.2 nanograms per milliliter, kidney disease, and at 34 nanograms per milliliter, birth defects. Can we reasonably assume our PFAS mixture will show similar or expanded effects? Physicians know we are chronically overexposed, but there is no clinical guidance outside of PFOA and PFOS directing them on how to respond to our obvious exposures. At the moment, I'm informing my pediatrician about the latest toxicity studies related to PFAS placental transfer and breast milk contamination. This is backwards and depressing. Let's address the elephant in the room. There are data gaps potentially limiting how this committee feels it can inform itself. I believe these data gaps are by design. This is industry's standard playbook. From tobacco to PFAS, it's the same tired story. EWG has a great timeline showing when the chemical industry knew PFAS were toxic and how long they hid their findings. This committee should be able to access a comprehensive library of toxicity and human health studies to inform itself regarding North Carolina's PFAS contamination crisis, but it can't. That's because the chemical industry is responsible for submitting toxicity data and all the PFAS they release into the environment, but they aren't doing that fully. I feel these chemical manufacturers are not operating responsibly or with good faith. That's why I've been working with 6 NC Justice and environmental groups to petition the EPA to order Chemours submit toxicity and human health data on at least 54 of their PFAS linked to air, soil, water, and food supply exposures in our region. We are also concerned the chemical industry is exploiting the integrity of the scientific process by creating intentional and unnecessary data gaps. Please do not let this continue on your watch. I am begging you to make a moral choice on behalf of our shared humanity. The chemical industry has benefited for decades at our exposure, allowing the gap between our exposures and clinical guidance to perpetuate environmental injustice, and it allows our most vulnerable populations to systemically suffer harder and faster. Please sound the alarms. If you need to rewrite your playbook, then please rewrite it now. North Carolina needs relevant guidance that adequately protects, informs, and monitors those of us who have confirmed high levels of newer PFAS exposures but lack the clinical guidance to inform patient care. People in my region are concerned about thyroid cancer. We live in a confirmed 3-county cancer cluster. We are concerned about large numbers of young women below the age of 45 being diagnosed with breast cancer. Currently, North Carolina is ranked number 8 in the nation for new diagnoses annually. Families living on base at Fort Bragg and residents in Brunswick County are concerned about pediatric bone cancers like osteosarcoma and brain tumors. Families in the Wilmington area are concerned about rare pediatric kidney cancers and diseases. Residents in southeastern North Carolina and Pittsboro are concerned about bladder cancer, failing gallbladders, testicular cancer, pancreatic cancers, liver cancers, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, leukemia, rare blood cancers, colon cancers, autoimmune diseases, digestive issues, multiple sclerosis, skin disorders, infertility, developmental delays, learning disabilities, autism, brain tumors, and breast cancers. I want to leave you today with a reminder of why we are here. It's our humanity. Please don't compartmentalize this. Engage it. No one living in a PFAS contaminated community has to go outside their inner circle to find anecdotal evidence of real suffering in our communities. This is my friend this is my friend Sarah McLaughlin. She just started her 3rd round of chemo treatment to battle colon cancer. This is my friend Tom Kennedy, and he just celebrated his 60th round of chemo treatments for terminal brain and bone cancer. And my friend Kara had her gallbladder spontaneously stop working, suffered an aggressive form of breast cancer, and was recently diagnosed with hyperthyroidism. Here's Margaret and Bob. These are Kara's parents. Margaret has a rare blood cancer. Her husband, Bob, has lost his appendix, lost his bladder due to bladder cancer, and early stages of leukemia. And this is my husband, David. He was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and that's him with his twin brother who has had no illnesses like the ones we experienced after moving to Wilmington. This is simply not normal. And thank you so much for your time.
Well, Emily, thank you so much for sharing your story and your knowledge with us.